Which areas of the snack industry do you predict will have most growth?
Any way that you can deliver something that people want, but without the guilt.
Are there any parts of that journey that you would probably take out?
Sampling at farmers markets.
You craft an exit strategy to maximize your profits.
If you're selling to a financial buyer, they're looking at the business through the lens of what improvements can I make over a 3 to 5 year period to ultimately resell this business to another financial buyer or a big company.
If you could give yourself a few pieces of advice when you were starting Bright Foods, what would they be?
Don't vertically integrate. Manufacturing is a very expensive, very different business. Gross margin, gross margin, gross margin.
Welcome. My name is Daniel Gerlay, and I'm the president of the Global Young Entrepreneur Society, an international organization supporting exceptional young people in accomplishing their entrepreneurial ambitions. Co-hosting the interview with me today is Lewis Swire, director of GYES's UK operations and the editor-in-chief of the Curious Times. Joining us is Brenden Schaefer, founder of Bright Foods, a refrigerated nutrition bar company, which he sold to BLD Capital in 2021. Bright Foods secured distribution in Whole Foods and Sprouts and grew to become the #2 branded category in just 18 months. Brenden is a former longtime Pepsi executive, where he was the brand manager of Naked Juice, which he grew to $600 million in sales, making it the highest growth brand in Pepsi's US portfolio. Brenden has managed marketing budgets ranging from less than $100,000 to $30 million. We are very pleased to welcome Brenden Schaefer.
It's great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you on. What is your founding story of Bright Foods?
So my impetus for starting Bright Foods was really born out of a personal need. I love exercising outdoors, and it's not for me just about the exercise, but it's about the activity. I was a very serious cyclist throughout my 30s and got into ultra cycling, which is rides of over 100 miles, often with thousands of feet of climbing into the mountains. And while I was doing that on the weekends, my day job was at Pepsi, leading marketing for Naked Juice. And that gave me incredible insight into consumer trends and what it was that people were eating, what they weren't eating, and why. And this personal need that I had was for a product that I could eat that was going to give me the energy that I wanted and would taste great and leave me feeling great. And I saw a gap in the market. And the bars that were around at the time generally had a lot of sugar and sat like a brick in your stomach. Juices had lots of sugar but no fiber, so you'd get a spike of energy, but then afterwards you'd crash. And I always would bring fresh fruits with me to work, intending to eat them, but then they would sit at my desk because I was running from meeting to meeting and time to wash my hands afterwards and deal with these peels. So I thought to myself, it'd be great if I could find a way to get the nutrition of whole fruits and vegetables in a format that worked for my busy life. And there was an interesting technology that I had learned about called high pressure processing, which allowed you to preserve food for a longer period of time without dulling the flavor, which is typically what happens when you have to use heat as a preservative. So I set about trying to create the world's first refrigerated whole fruit and vegetable bar, and did some work nights and weekends while I was at PepsiCo, and then took the plunge and left in January of 2016. And over the course of the next 2.5 years, I worked with some brilliant R&D scientists, including professors at UC Davis and Cornell, which are the two leading food science universities in the US. And we figured out how to actually bring in fresh produce, chop it up, get it to hold together in a bar where all the juice and all the fiber was in there, and then taste delicious using this HPP technology. And we ended up having to build out a factory within someone else's factory because the product was so unique, no one could make it. In the process, developed quite a bit of intellectual property. And as our first customer, I was fortunate to partner with Whole Foods, pitched them at a store opening when I showed up with a backpack and these bars that I had made in my kitchen, wrapped plastic with a sticker for a label. And they got really excited because it was so said that they wanted to pioneer it. So we launched with Whole Foods in March of 2018. And that was the journey from initial idea to product on shelf, which in and of itself is still kind of just the beginning.
That's such a cool story, actually. So I can imagine there are so many layers to starting a snack brand. But what was the process for developing the product line?
My experience was kind of in a few different phases. So I started out working with a chef, and she created the first formulas. And I realized at a certain point in time that I was going to have to go work with a product developer. I don't have a background in product development. My background was in strategy and marketing. And product development is a very the people who are great at it are highly, highly skilled. There's both the culinary side of it, but then there's also the science side of it and understanding all the technical aspects that go into not only creating something at benchtop, but then actually scaling it. So I was fortunate to work with a brilliant product developer who ended up joining our team full time. And we iterated and iterated and iterated. And one of the big challenges for us was because we were breaking new ground with this technology, the product that we would make at benchtop often ended up tasting quite different from the product we would get after we had applied the pressure process. There was always a delay. We'd make it, we'd send it out for this process. We'd have to wait a week. But we just kept at it. And through lots of internal tastings and consumer feedback, got it to a point that we felt really good about it.
How did you fund the company?
That was done through angels, net worth folks. And we were fortunate in that we ended up getting kind of purchased early. We were about to raise our first institutional round of capital in February 2020. Or March of 2020 when COVID hit, and all of a sudden the fundraising markets really dried up. And then, as it turned out, the way that we had this family office come to us kind of a year or so afterwards, and they made an offer to buy us. And we were just lucky that, we had been operating very lean and managing cash very, very tightly. And so, that initial money that we got from angels, we did a few follow-on rounds with high net worth folks, but it was all, kind of, we never did kind of a traditional venture capital round. It's just sort of the way that our story unfolded.
And did you ever consider crowdfunding?
We did briefly, and we didn't do it. In part because at that point we were so busy running the business, and we were fortunate that again we kind of had the angel folks who would re-up, and so we kind of kept doing little bits and pieces along the way that way instead.
That's brilliant. What manufacturing options did you consider, and why did you make the choice for the press and shaper that you chose?
We started out looking at co-manufacturing, which is the typical route that food and beverage companies take to market. So co-manufacturers are companies that are dedicated to making products generally for other people. Rarely they'll own their own brands because the manufacturing skill set is quite specific and quite distinct from the sales and marketing skill set. In our case, again, nobody could make it because we had this very unique product, which was sort of, I like to say, it was kind of like the stepchild almost of a juice in a bar. So the juice manufacturers didn't have bar making equipment. The bar manufacturers didn't have a facility that could handle fresh produce. And so we were sort of forced into this corner where the only way we were going to be able to pull this off was if we built a line within a fresh facility, got bar making equipment, and then kind of Frankensteined it to fit our product. And when we ended up launching a second product line of nut butter bars, those were much more, they were much easier to manufacture. And so then we went to a co-manufacturer, and all the standard considerations apply. You're looking for somebody who has the know-how that you need. You're looking for someone who has the capacity to scale. So they need to have enough production lines that you can spend a decent amount of time with them and hopefully stay with them all the way through potential exit.
Do you have any advice on securing angel investment?
Angels ultimately are investing in you, and among the different types of investors, angels are going to have the highest risk tolerance. They could come to them, you really only have an idea, maybe you have an early prototype, and they are going to want to understand your vision, where you see potential for this business to go. They're going to want to understand your capabilities. So why are you the right person to start this particular business? What is it either about your personal experiences, or your professional experiences, or a combination of the two that lend you some unique insight, some unique drive to sort of summit all of the inevitable mountains that you're going to come across on this journey. And they want to understand also that you're going to be a good steward of their money. You're going to be responsible. The final piece is valuation and making sure that you're coming to the table with valuation, or in the case of a convertible note, a cap that is reasonable. People approach it in different ways, and it depends on the state of the economy, and it depends on the state of the financial markets to some extent, what valuation angels feel comfortable with. There's generally conventional wisdom when the stock market is down. Even if you're talking to high folks, some will tend to feel a little less wealthy, whereas when the market is up, they will tend to feel a little bit wealthier and a little bit more inclined to take risks. And so valuations kind of trail or line up with that general sentiment.
How did you secure distribution for Bright Foods?
Well, as I said, with Whole Foods, it was me going up to the president of the region, who I knew was there. He was a friend of mine, was sampling at that store opening, and he said, "This is what she looks like. Just go find her." So I literally walked up to her, and she's having dinner with her brother. And I said, "Hey, my friend Christian said that I should come find you. Are you Diane?" And then I said, "Well, I have this product." And at first, she sort of gave me a side eye. And then as I showed her the product, as I say, she got really excited. She said, "Well, let's walk over to the shelf. What would you want to price this at? If you include these superfoods in it, I think you can price it here. Without the superfoods, I think you can only price it here." And then I remember she said, "Come back and follow up with me." And she was not an effusive woman. She's like pretty serious, and that was a pretty good. She was interested, and then followed up with number two, who was highly skeptical of what I was doing. And I remember I had this presentation, and I sat down. She said, "Oh, like bars, yeah, they all have so much sugar in them." And I said, "Yeah, no, I agree." And as we were flipping through, once she saw that I'd come from Pepsi, there was a little bit of credibility. And then once she saw the products, she got really, really excited. And so that was Whole Foods. And then we came to the world's largest natural food show in 2019. We debuted, and there were 4,000 companies. We were named the most innovative product of the show out of 4,000 companies, which was really surreal. And Sprouts came to us at that show and said, we want to launch you nationally. And that was how that came about. A lot of the other markets that we were dealing with, in some cases they were approaching us. In some cases, you kind of figure out how the process works for a particular customer, and then you follow it. So there's a really influential account here in Los Angeles called Erewhon, which is where all the influencers shop, and their office happens to be in an apartment building. And you walk through the parking lot and you get into this elevator, and they're like, go up to the 5th floor, ask for Vicky. And you walk up and you're literally in an apartment building. And then you look for this number and you knock and you walk in, and there are products strewn all over the place. And I remember I sat down with this woman, Vicky, and I had a presentation, but we spent 45 minutes talking about our kids. And then I showed her the deck, and I had actually made a mistake on one thing because I put a data point in there that turned out to backfire. But what she said is, "Oh, you're already in Whole Foods?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Okay, cool. Follow, send me the product. Here's this. Fill out this paperwork. Go from there." So it really runs the gamut. Walmart approached us early on, and they wanted to launch us, and that was just because they had discovered us. So my advice when it comes to distribution, and this is specific obviously to the food business and the beverage business because that's what I know, is the cardinal sin that most people make is they go for lots of distribution right out of the gate, and they say, okay, I want to build this business, and I'm going to take on all of Whole Foods stores, 500 stores, or I'm going to go launch it like Walmart nationally. Don't realize is retail is a very expensive game because it's not just about getting your product on the shelf, it's getting your product to move off the shelf. And the way that you do that is traditionally in food and beverage, you sample and you promote, and both of those things are very expensive. And the other thing that a lot of people don't realize is unless you have a very healthy gross margin on your product, meaning, it costs you, gross margin is, it costs me I sell it to the retail for $1. It costs me 50 cents to make it. My gross margin is 50 cents. It's the difference between what I pay for it and the amount for which I sell it. Unless you have a lot of gross margin right out of the gate, which people typically don't, as you start to build in the different layers of the value chain, you're selling to a distributor who's taking a cut. You're then selling to the retailer who's going to mark it up so that they can get their margin. On top of that, you have a broker who's typically needed to help manage the relationship with the retailer. They're taking a cut. Then you add in those marketing expenses that I was talking about. On top of it, you very quickly can find yourself losing money. And so all that to say, when it comes to launching a product, the best option, depending on the product, is either to go into a small number of retail doors, 30, 40, and to babysit them. And to go in there and you sample the product a ton, you hear people say, you make packaging changes, you make formulation changes, but you do it at a point where you're not investing tons of money in packaging, you're not investing tons of money in ingredients because it's still relatively small. Or you launch it direct to consumer. The direct to consumer space has evolved quite a bit. So if you have a highly differentiated product, you can still do it in an economically sustainable way. But if you're competing in a very saturated category, it's gotten a lot more expensive. It's a lot harder to make the math pencil out. Or you do both. If it's a fit for the product, and you kind of take a small omni-channel slice, and you think of that as your learning laboratory. This is all right. I'm incubating the product here. I'm going to again understand what's working, what's not working, and be able to make changes fairly quickly.
So just a minute ago, you mentioned the role of credibility in negotiating these deals. Do you have any advice for how young entrepreneurs can increase their credibility in this space?
There are different ways. I think, certainly coming from a good university helps or can help. I think if you have direct experience with a business, maybe your family is in the business and you've gotten a chance to work, and you've kind of learned through that way. Surrounding yourself with advisors who have credibility is a very common strategy, because inevitably when you start a company, there are tons of things you're not going to know. Even me coming from Pepsi, I sort of knew on balance the direction that I was heading, but there were so many blind spots that I had that were so significant. And surrounding yourself with people who are strong in the areas where you are not is nothing to be ashamed of. In fact, that's a sign that you're smart. That's a sign that you're humble and that you realize business is a team sport.
The success for Bright Food speaks for itself. But what was your marketing strategy?
We did not have a lot of money, so that as you were reading the intro, Daniel, and you're talking about having in the early days less than $100,000 in marketing versus the $30 million I had in it. The most impactful thing you can do with food and beverage in the beginning is just hand out product, which is expensive. But food, at the end of the day, part experience and part checking a box. And when I say checking a box, if you're talking about functional food, like I'm eating this because it is giving me a distinct functional benefit. It's keeping me full. It's giving me energy. It's giving me probiotics, which I need. And the only way you can get sort of people often over the hurdle is if you sample it for them. And that's particularly true if it's a new product. So our biggest investments were in sampling the product and then digital marketing and getting influencers to talk about the product, leveraging their credibility. So when they would say, hey, this is really delicious, I love it, and then to the extent you can, if it's a product that works really well for DTC and has the margins, doing an affiliate strategy. So every time an influencer sells product for you, they make a little bit of money. We did a bit of that as well, but it was very kind of a lot of blocking and tackling and just hand to hand, getting the product in front of people in the right places.
How did you solve fulfillment?
Fulfillment, you go to what's called a 3PL, which is a third-party logistics partner. So an order comes in, and then they're the ones who are packing it up for you and shipping it out. But I also fulfilled a lot of boxes myself in the early days.
When COVID hit, your category declined by 80%. How did you pivot the business?
That was incredibly challenging, and we'd gotten to a nice run rate. And as I say, we were getting ready to go raise some outside money. And all of a sudden that fell to the ground. And we had a team of 16 people at the time, and suddenly didn't really have the money to afford 16 people. And because our volumes had plummeted, we weren't running the product enough to have the math make sense. You need to line. Your goal is to use that production line as much as possible. It's called throughput. And when your volume plummets, the throughput plummets, and suddenly you're burdened with, I have to pay rent, I have this equipment, which breaks down all the time, and all that stuff takes cash. So we had just launched our clean protein line, and we put that on the shelves the week before COVID, and it just flew. And I thought, oh, wow, okay, like we got something. And then the next week, COVID hit. And I was in conversations with my board, and they said, hey, with the state of the fundraising markets, you're going to have to ultimately choose one of these two businesses. You can't do both. And as I mentioned earlier, the nut butter bar business that we had started was made with a co-manufacturer. So we didn't own any equipment, we didn't staffing, we didn't have to worry about making the product, and we had much better gross margins on that product, just by virtue of having learned along the way how important gross margins were. So I made the decision to pivot over, and we ended up selling off all of our equipment in the fruit and vegetable line, running down our inventory, moving the new product on shelf, and leaning in with Sprouts, and then doing our best to figure out how do you drive trial, get people to try a product that is ultimately an on-the-go product at a time when everybody's stuck at home. So it's quite challenging.
I can imagine. You sold your company to BLD Capital. How can you craft an exit strategy to maximize your profits?
That depends on a number of different factors, and one of whom is who you're selling to. So, different buyers have different incentives. If you're selling to a financial buyer, meaning a private equity firm, they're looking at the business through the lens of what improvements can I make over a 3 to 5 year period to ultimately resell this or sell this business to another financial buyer or a big company. If you're looking at selling to a big company, they are going to think about the business through the lens of, am I attracting a different base of consumers than the ones who are purchasing the products that I own today? Can I use my existing sales force to sell this product into either new channels or to go deeper into existing channels? When I say channels, I mean, like here in the US, we have Costco, which I believe you may have in Scotland as well, but it's a big warehouse style customer. So, but they have many regions across the US. So are you in all regions of Costco, or have you just proven it out in a few? Okay, if you've proven it out in a few, there's a whole bunch of white space that we can go after. And then it also depends on the stage of the business. One of the calculations that any buyer is going to make is the good old risk reward. So what's my potential upside from acquiring this business versus what are the risks inherent in the business today? And opportunity and risk always go together. You can't really have meaningful opportunity without some risks alongside it. So it's about building the story and painting the picture to whoever that potential acquirer is, being mindful of what's important to them, to illustrate why the pot of gold that they can go after is ultimately more attractive than the potential spikes that might be on the ground in certain places as they're navigating their way there.
What advice would you have for a young entrepreneur considering founding a food company?
I would suggest going and getting experience working for someone else first. And not everybody agrees with this point of view, but I believe that there's a lot that you can learn by going into a great company. And the experience of, or I should say, depending on the size of the company you go into, you will have a very different set of experiences. But I received the advice early on, and I pass it on to other people. Go learn on someone else's dime first. Because when you're in the game, it is, nothing can fully prepare you for it. But having a base of experience that you can draw upon, understanding how marketing works, how sales works, the basics of finance, the basics of supply chain, learning how to manage people, and learning how to manage people in part by watching other people who are great at it. Those are all really valuable skill sets. And there's some interesting data which suggests that people who start the companies after the age of 35 sometimes, not always, have a kind of a higher rate of success. And I think that is due to the fact that you just have had experience at that point, depending on the nature of your experience. Now, there are the other examples. of people who right out of the gate go and start companies, and they figure it out by doing. But I'm of the mindset that it's whenever you can learn from someone else's mistakes, it's preferable to do that, because you're going to make plenty of them on your own. I know I certainly have, and so you know, try to soak up what you can from companies that already do it really, really well.
How was your transition from being a corporate executive to being a founder?
It's an enormous transition. Full stop. I started my company out of this room, and before that, I had multiple agencies that were helping to drive the brand. I had people on my team who were responsible for executing things. There were a number of aspects of the business that I didn't even have to worry about, because Pepsi was taking care of back office functions like HR and IT and procurement. And I got to do the very interesting intellectual work and the very gratifying people work, and was somewhat oblivious to the realities of a manufacturing business. And working within a system as well, the priorities are set from on high, and then they're sort of shared with you. And you're leading within a particular sphere of influence, but you're not the one who's grappling with those very weighty strategic decisions. And so, as you can imagine, when I left, all of a sudden, I was telling you about blind spots earlier, those were all really significant blind spots for me. At the same time, there was a very exhilarating sense of possibility and freedom and autonomy, and the ability to question things, the ability to say, okay, so this is how it was always done before. Why? What would happen if we did it this other way? Let's try that. And learning how to share a vision with people, learning how to recruit people, to learning how to motivate people, dealing with very different types of people than I had worked with at PepsiCo. And all of that was an incredibly rich experience, and really took me far outside of my comfort zone and helped me to grow as a leader, and then to grow as a person as well. So it's a vast topic that we could go into much more detail on, but at a high level, those were a lot of elements of the transition, and it was big.
Which areas within the snack industry do you predict will have most growth within the coming years?
So snacking is just a great space to be in. I know the US market, obviously the best, but people are snacking more and more throughout the day. I think on average, millennials snack 2.5 times a day. I know I certainly do, and I'm not a millennial. And within snacking, there are categories that I think are always going to be mainstays. So salty snacks, anything that is a better for you snack, any way that you can deliver something that people want, but without the guilt. And in fact, if you can give it a functional benefit, even better. So there's a brand called Hippies, which is also in the UK, which, they're like Cheetos, but they're made from chickpea and they have plant protein. Perfect example. Cookies, chocolate, people want to have little treats throughout the day. We're dealing with a lot in this world, and it's wonderful sometimes to just go have a piece of chocolate. And that's just going to continue. And certainly anything with protein and gluten-free are the two trends that I've seen over time. And now to that, I would add lower carb. Those three trends I don't think are going away. And protein comes in so many different forms now, both food, beverage, cereal, you name it. So those are a lot of the spaces that I think are just poised to continue growing.
How did you build your brand?
Yeah, as I was saying before, it's really just hand to hand. one person at a time. A brand is a sort of a collection of 1,000 soft touches. And what I mean by that is, where do you show up? Which grocery stores are you at? Which other stores are you at that the consumer is visiting? When they go to your Instagram or your website, what's the feeling that they get? What's the one thing that they take away from you? Because it's really all you can stand for in the consumer's mind is one thing. When they eat the product, what's the experience? Is it delightful? Does it leave them wanting to come back? And at the entrepreneurial level, again, who else? What other influencers are talking about your brand? Are there celebrities who are credible and believable, who are, getting behind your brand? All of those different techniques, many of which are not particularly exciting, but in the early stages, that's the reality. The product really has to be unique and memorable. That's the first point, most important point.
Thank you. So when you were originally developing your first product, did you outsource like a food consultant or like a product developer? I think
I did. Yeah. So in the beginning, I had a chef, and then I had a product developer who was a consultant who eventually we brought in house.
And it was worth it, clearly, because you brought them on.
Yeah. For our product, it was worth it. I think for a product that's a little bit less complicated, I would not recommend having product development capabilities in house in the early days. Just going back to, your goal is to take as much of the money you have and put it towards first finding product market fit, and then after you have product market fit, driving the business.
Are there any books you would recommend to get some insight into the industry?
The best book I have seen, and you might want to link to this in the show notes, is called Ramping Your Brand. And it's by a PhD named James Patterson. And he, by training, is actually an anthropologist, cultural anthropologist. And then he spent a number of years working for one of the leading market research firms called the Hartman Group. And he really has deconstructed what it is that has allowed a number of brands to ramp quickly. And he thinks about it in a very sophisticated way. So I would certainly recommend that book. The other resources that I would look at just to get a sense of the industry and how it works are Food Business News and nosh.com, which is, that latter one is for the natural and sustainable consumer products industries.
Thanks. And you mentioned at the start going to like large food events and conferences. Did it make a difference for you, and would you recommend it for other food brands?
I think it's a great thing to do. It made a huge difference for us because we got that recognition, and it really put us on the map. The value ultimately in going to these conferences is twofold. Number one, you got access to a number of retailers who you might not be able to reach on your own. And number two, you get networking with peers in the industry, but also with all the other people who kind of participate in the ecosystem. That being said, it's not cheap. So you should figure that it's going to cost $15,000 to $20,000 just to exhibit at one of these shows. And so it's a serious consideration. And I think you just have to look at it and ask yourself, am I going to get the value out of this? Am I going to be able to see a return on investment? So it might not be year one or year two. It might be year three that you go. Natural Products Expo West. It's the biggest natural product food show in the world.
Given your process and experience when founding a food brand, are there any parts of that journey that you would probably take out, or you would advise other entrepreneurs just to pass over to maximize the efficiency and speed in which they can get to the point they want to go to?
I spent a lot of time in the early days sampling at farmers markets, and that I thought was useful because it allowed us to get a lot of consumer feedback. But what I found after the fact was it's different than competing with a product when a product is on shelf and no one's there to rep it. So there's really no way to replicate the experience of having your brand out there when no one's in the store and just seeing if people pick it up. So that I think I would probably not do again. And I think most of the other things were kind of important steps along the way.
What business books that had a major influence on you would you recommend for young entrepreneurs?
The best book I've ever read about the startup experience is called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And it's by Ben Horowitz, who's the co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz at Silicon Valley. That book is really incredible. There are other books I'm just thinking of that I've read, which are valuable at different stages of the journey. But I think as a young entrepreneur, that's a good one. Jim Collins wrote this book, which is very famous, called Good to Great. I think there's some interesting ideas in there around leading with humility. And it's good just to familiarize yourself with that concept. A lot of the business books that I've actually found recently to be the most valuable are the Harvard Business Review booklets. They're sort of thin books, which are a compilation of thinking from different authors. So there's a whole series that they have on management. They have one for new managers. They have one for more seasoned managers. There's a whole one that they have on coaching employees. They have them on all sorts of different functional topics, marketing, finance. They have a number of them, obviously, on leadership. And I like those because with a fairly small investment of time, you get pretty substantive information and insights, which you can then think about. So you don't have to read a whole book. If you have 20 minutes, you can sit down and read a chapter and scribble a bunch of notes in the margin, and it'll just give you stuff that you can then apply. It's very practical.
If you could give yourself a few pieces of advice in 2016 when you were starting Bright Foods, what would they be?
Food is about evolution, not revolution. You don't want to try to change people's behavior because changing consumer behavior is incredibly expensive and takes a very long time. You want to offer a better mousetrap that fits in with somebody's existing behavior. I would say to the extent you can do so, don't vertically integrate. Manufacturing is a very expensive, very different business, different types of people, different way of thinking. And there's a reason why the structure exists, generally speaking, today, where you have co-manufacturers and then brands. The brands are focusing on sales and marketing. Gross margin, gross margin, gross margin. It's the name of the game. And if you can have a gross margin that starts with a 6 or a 7, 60%, 70%, or even higher, that is where you want to be. And then I would say it's ultimately about people. And everybody says it's about people. But having gone through an experience where I was all alone in the beginning and I had to do everything myself, and then I had these experts who came and joined me, it gave me this deep appreciation for the value of incredible people. And they're there to celebrate with you when times are great, and they're there to kind of lift everybody up when times are tough. And that really is the magic. At the end of the day, it is about what you can do with a group of other people, and the bonds that you form and the problems that you solve. The other thing, which was a game changer for me, was my co-founder joined 2.5 years in. and he was great. He's a brilliant guy. To the extent you can have a co-founder in the beginning, that can be huge. And the key there is you don't want somebody who's a carbon copy of you. You want to share values. You want to make sure that it's really like a marriage. You want to have shared values, but each of you should bring something different to the table. In my case, I'm a marketing and strategy guy, and I have lots of ideas. And my co-founder was an engineer by training and ops and finance guy. But we both interacted with people kind of in the same way. We both treated people with a significant amount of respect. We were both very driven. We really communicated well with each other. And if you can find someone like that, that's where you really get 1 + 1 = 3. And there's a lot of magic that happens there. And you just move so much faster and you make such better decisions.
What marketing advice do you have for food entrepreneurs?
In consumer goods, people are ultimately buying a product on the basis of 3 things, which are what's the product, what is the brand, and what's the price. And the reason companies invest billions of dollars into marketing is it works. And ultimately, marketing, again, it's a really vast subject, but the goal of marketing is to figure out how to connect with a consumer. And I don't even like to use that word. It's how do you connect with someone and explain to them, both rationally, but then also emotionally, why it is that your product is going to make their life better in some way, shape, or form. And if that's sort of the overarching goal, I would highly encourage everybody to go pick up a marketing textbook like Philip Cotter or professors from Kellogg, because the ways that you do that are numerous and really kind of depend on the individual product, the consumer, what matters to that consumer, how you communicate with them, and so forth. So it was probably not a very satisfying answer, but at a very high level, for any, again, consumer product, the way a brand feels and the product attributes that the product delivers, and the way that you share all of that with somebody, that's all the domain of marketing.
One more, I'll take you right back to when you were founding Bright Foods, and at these farmers markets, getting as much consumer research and testing your product. How did you ensure that your product was able to pivot and adapt to what your feedback was saying?
So I would just take lots of notes, and then I'd bring it to the product developer and say, here's what I heard. We need to make this sweeter. We need to make this a little bit firmer. We need to do this, can you pull something together in the next, 5 to 7 days, and let's taste it again. And it's that rapid prototyping process.
Amazing. And at that point, were you producing in like a small commercial sized kitchen? Brilliant.
We have come to the end of today's discussion, which I found highly insightful into the food industry. On behalf of the Global Young Entrepreneur Society, Brenden Schaefer, thank you very much for speaking with us today.
It's been my pleasure, guys. I love what you're doing. Keep it up.